This passport is worthless here because you don't belong on this flight. The sound of paper ripping cut through the air. The flight attendant yanked the passport from Amara's hands, holding it high like it was evidence of a crime. Her voice dripped with venom. This passport is worthless here. People like you don't belong on this flight. Gasps. A few passengers froze in disbelief. Others leaned in as if eager for a spectacle. Amara's chest tightened. Her mother stepped forward, voice trembling. "Please, that's my daughter's passport. She's done nothing wrong." The attendant ignored her, eyes fixed on Amara with a smirk that felt rehearsed. "You think flashing fake papers gets you in? Not here. Not today." Amara's mouth opened, but no sound came out. All she could hear was the pounding in her ears, the sudden realization that every eye in the terminal was now on her. Whispers crawled through the crowd. Words like liar, scammer, and worse. Her dream, studying abroad, her chance at a future, was being stripped away before her eyes. And then the attendant did something that made time itself stop. She raised the passport higher, as if preparing for a final act of cruelty. With a flick of her lighter, fire bloomed. The small flame touched the edge of Amara's passport, and in seconds the pages curled, blackened, and turned to ash. A horrified silence spread. Then chaos. "Is she serious?" Someone whispered. "Did she just burn her passport?" Another voice shouted. Amara's heart cracked as she reached forward. "No, please don't!" But it was too late. The little book that carried her name, her identity, her dreams, disintegrated into smoke. The attendant dropped the smoldering scraps to the floor, dusting her hands as though she had just completed a chore. "Problem solved," she sneered. For a split second, nobody moved. Then murmurs broke the stillness, some outraged, others entertained. A woman clutched her phone, recording every second. A man chuckled under his breath, muttering, "Serves her right." Amara's knees trembled. She felt the ground slipping beneath her. But she refused to fall. Not yet, because what came next would cut even deeper than the fire itself. The silence fractured into two camps. One half of the crowd whispered in disbelief, exchanging nervous glances. The other half reveled in her humiliation. "She probably forged it," a man muttered loud enough for Amara to hear. Typical. "Always trying to cheat the system," another snickered. Her mother's pleas went unanswered. "Please, someone stop this. Please help us." But the only response was the cold, unblinking stare of strangers. Or worse, their laughter. Phones lit up everywhere. Screens glowed as people filmed, their faces blank, detached, as though her pain was entertainment. The cruelty wasn't just in the attendant's actions, it was in the silence of those who chose to do nothing. And in that silence, Amara felt herself shrinking. Her voice, her pride, her worth, all of it seemed to vanish under the weight of those watching eyes. Every whisper felt like a knife. Every smirk felt like a slap. And yet, in the middle of it all, she felt a hand, her mother's hand, still gripping hers, shaking but holding on. Amara looked down at their intertwined fingers. Her mother's hand was trembling so violently it felt like it might break. "Don't cry, Amara," her mother whispered, though her own voice cracked with fear. "We will get through this, but how?" The passport was gone. The humiliation was everywhere. The dream she had worked for, prayed for, was vanishing in smoke. Amara bit her lip until she tasted blood, trying to hold back the tears. She wanted to be strong for her mother, for herself, but the shame was suffocating. Her body shook. Her vision blurred. And in that blur, she could still see the smirk plastered on the attendant's face, smug and satisfied. "Boarding without a passport? Not happening," the woman mocked. "Security will deal with you." Amara's legs wobbled. Her mother squeezed tighter. "Stay strong, baby. Stay strong," but Amara couldn't stay silent anymore. Something inside her, hurt, rage, despair, all of it collided into one desperate cry. Her voice cracked, but it carried. "Why would you do that to me?" The question sliced through the murmurs. It wasn't just for the flight attendant. It was for every single person standing there, watching her burn in silence. Her chest heaved as tears finally spilled down her cheeks. "I worked for this. I earned this. That passport was my life. Why would you destroy it?" For the first time, the attendant faltered, her eyes flickering away from Amara's, but she quickly recovered, scoffing. "Because frauds don't deserve respect." Gasps erupted. A man in the crowd shouted, "This isn't right!" But his voice drowned beneath the chorus of whispers and the clicks of recording phones. Amara's question lingered in the air, unanswered, echoing louder than any insult. Her pain had been laid bare for all to see. But what she didn't know, what nobody knew, was that her question would ignite something far greater than humiliation, because this moment, this cry for justice, was only the beginning. "Her name is Amara," the teacher had once said proudly at a school assembly, "the kind of student who reminds you why you still believe in tomorrow. I am 17 years old, honor roll, debate champion, and the first in her school to ever earn an invitation overseas. On paper, she was just another teenager with a suitcase and a dream. In reality, she carried the weight of an entire family's sacrifice, the quiet hope of parents who believed their daughter's name would someday matter beyond the borders of their small town. But that morning, as she stood at the terminal, none of those titles mattered. She wasn't thinking of grades or medals. She was thinking of the fire in her chest, the restless thrill of finally stepping into a world she'd only read about. She was finally leaving the cage of familiarity, though she had no idea the bars of another kind were waiting for her. Long before the airport lights and restless crowds, there had been nights lit only by the glow of her desk lamp. "Again, Amara," her mother would whisper through the cracked door. "Just one more hour," and she did. She rehearsed arguments until her voice broke, scribbled pages of notes until her fingers ached. Every word sharpened, every pause perfected. This wasn't just studying. It was survival, her way of proving that brilliance could exist in a girl who looked like her, a girl the world often overlooked. Her dream wasn't built in daylight, it was carved in silence, in sacrifice, in the moments no one applauded. That was the power she carried into the airport. But she couldn't know how quickly others would try to strip it from her hands. Her father had given up his one luxury, a used car he loved more than words, to pay for her flight. Her mother stitched clothes late into the night, hemming strangers' dresses for just enough to cover her visa. Every dollar earned was a thread of love, woven into her journey. The plane ticket wasn't paper, it was sweat, exhaustion, hope. Her family had chosen to live with less so that she could live with more. That kind of sacrifice carries a quiet weight. It makes failure unthinkable and success non-negotiable. And as Amara wheeled her suitcase past them that morning, she felt the burden and the blessing of it pressing on her shoulders. "Hold your head high, baby." Those were her mother's last words before she disappeared into the crowd, her eyes brimming with both pride and fear. Amara nodded, though her lips trembled. She told herself she wasn't just leaving home. She was carrying it with her. Every lecture, every meal skipped so she could study, every prayer whispered when bills piled too high, it was all packed in her chest. She promised herself she wouldn't falter. "Not here, not now." But promises are fragile things when the world decides to test them. At the check-in counter, the flight attendant scanned her documents, her eyes sharp and cold. She didn't smile. She didn't speak. Just one long, suspicious stare that lingered a second too long. Amara shifted uneasily, unsure why the look cut so deep. Was it her skin, her accent, or just something in the way she carried herself? The moment passed, but it carved a scar of unease. She brushed it off, telling herself she was imagining things. But deep down, some part of her knew this was only the beginning of something she could never have prepared for. "Are you sure you're in the right line?" The words sliced through the air before Amara could even respond. The flight attendant's tone wasn't curious. It was condescending, the kind of question that wasn't really a question at all. "Yes," Amara answered softly, clutching her boarding pass. "This is the priority check-in, right?" The woman's smile was thin, mocking. "Priority is for premium passengers, not students with discount programs." Her cheeks burned. She wanted to explain that she had earned this ticket, that her seat wasn't charity. But the way the attendant's eyes scanned her from head to toe said enough. It wasn't about the ticket. It was about her. Behind her, someone muttered impatiently. Another cleared their throat. The pressure of strangers' stares tightened around her chest. She stood frozen, the first cracks of humiliation forming as she realized this wasn't just about a line, and it was only getting worse. "This isn't a charity program," the attendant added, loud enough for those nearby to hear. Her voice dripped with mockery, each word coated in poison. A man in the line snickered. A woman shook her head in irritation. Their reactions weren't directed at the attendant, they were aimed at Amara, as if her very presence was the inconvenience. Amara opened her mouth to speak, but her throat betrayed her. No words came out. Only silence, thick with shame. The attendant leaned forward. "Do you even know how much these tickets cost? Because something tells me—" She didn't finish the sentence. She didn't need to. The smirk on her lips said everything. Amara gripped her suitcase tighter. She wished she could disappear, but she couldn't. She was trapped in that line with everyone watching, waiting for her to break. And then the attendant reached for her passport. The woman flipped it open slowly, too slowly. She stared at the photo, then at Amara, then back at the photo again. "This doesn't look like you," she said flatly. Amara's heart skipped. "It's me," she whispered. I braided my hair differently." The attendant tilted the passport toward the light, shaking her head like she'd caught Amara in a lie. The seconds stretched into minutes. Passengers behind them groaned in frustration, their sighs slicing at Amara's back like invisible knives. "Are you sure this is valid?" The attendant pressed, her tone sharp, accusing. "It's valid," Amara insisted, though her voice trembled. "Please, that's me." But the longer the passport stayed in that woman's hands, the more it felt like her entire future was being held hostage too. And she could feel the crowd turning against her with every second that ticked by. By now, Amara could hear the whispers clearly. "She doesn't belong here." Probably trying to scam her way in. Unbelievable. Each word stung like a slap. Her skin felt too small for her body, her chest too tight to breathe. She glanced around desperately, searching for a sympathetic face. But all she saw were smirks, folded arms, rolling eyes. Not one voice spoke for her. Not one hand reached out. The isolation sank in, heavy and cold. For the first time, Amara wondered if maybe, just maybe, the attendant wanted the crowd to turn against her all along. "Step aside," the attendant ordered suddenly, snapping the passport shut. Amara froze. "Why? What's wrong?" "Extra verification," the woman replied, her lips curling into something between a sneer and a smile. Then, almost under her breath, she muttered words meant only for Amara's ears. "We've had issues with your kind before." The phrase sent a chill straight through her blood. Amara's hands shook as she stepped aside, the line swallowing her place. She wasn't just delayed. She was singled out, marked, humiliated in front of dozens of strangers. Her dream was only a few steps away. But in that moment, it felt farther than it ever had before. And the nightmare, it was only the beginning. "These papers aren't valid." The flight attendant's voice thundered across the gate as she yanked the passport from Amara's hands. Her words weren't quiet, weren't professional. They were an accusation delivered like a public sentence. Dozens of heads turned. The line froze. Amara's chest tightened as she stammered, "That's my real passport." "Please, check it again." But the woman lifted it high in the air, waving it as if it were evidence of a crime. "We've seen this before," she sneered. "Forged documents? Fake identities. And they always think they can fool us." A ripple of murmurs surged through the crowd. Someone muttered, "I knew it," while another shook their head in disbelief. The humiliation pressed down like a physical weight. Amara reached out, her voice trembling. "Ma'am, I worked for this. I have every right—" "Enough!" the attendant snapped, stepping back as if Amara's touch was poison. "This is fraud, and you will not be flying today." Her words weren't just rejection. They were condemned. And the cruelest part? She wasn't finished. With calculated calm, the attendant pulled a lighter from her pocket. For a heartbeat, no one moved. Then, with a single flick, fire danced in her hand. "No!" Amara gasped, lunging forward. But the woman was faster. The flame caught the edge of the passport, curling its corners into blackened ash. Amara's breath hitched as the pages, her future, her proof of identity, crumbled into fire. Gasps erupted around them. Someone shouted, "Is she serious?" Another voice whispered, "This can't be legal." But the attendant didn't flinch. She held the burning document until it disintegrated, then let the ashes scatter across the floor. Amara dropped to her knees, trying to gather the fragments, her fingers blackened by soot. "Please, that's my only passport. You can't—" The woman leaned down, her voice ice cold. "I just did." And with that, the floor beneath Amara's dignity collapsed. The terminal was no longer silent. It was a storm of reactions. Phones shot up, recording. Some passengers gasped in outrage, their disbelief spilling into shouts. "That's abuse of power," cried an elderly man, his voice shaking with fury. But others laughed under their breath, mocking Amara's desperation. "She probably forged it," someone whispered. Another scoffed, "Rules are rules." The divide was sharp, merciless. One half disgusted, the other entertained. And Amara stood in the middle, her shame amplified by every lens pointed at her. The old man stepped closer, pointing at the attendant. "You've gone too far. That's a child, not a criminal." But the attendant only straightened her uniform, lips curling into a cruel smile. "If she doesn't belong, she doesn't belong." And that line, those words, cut deeper than the flames ever could. Amara's vision blurred as hot tears streamed down her face. Her body shook, not from the fire, but from the weight of being stripped bare in front of strangers. Her mother rushed forward, falling to her knees before the attendant. Her voice cracked with desperation. "Please, I beg you." That passport was real. She's just a girl. "Don't take her dream away." The attendant's expression didn't soften. "Stand up, ma'am. Dignity won't be found on the floor." But Amara's mother stayed where she was, clutching the woman's shoes, sobbing as she pleaded. "We worked for this. We sacrificed everything for her chance. Please, don't destroy her future." The crowd murmured, uneasy now. Some passengers shifted, shame creeping into their eyes. But none moved to help, and Amara, watching her mother kneel for her, felt something break that she could never put back together. The attendant snapped her fingers at nearby guards. "Escort her out. No passport, no flight." The uniformed men hesitated. The old man, still filming, shouted, "Don't touch her! Everyone can see what's happening!" His voice carried across the gate, echoed by the cameras recording every second. The guards exchanged glances. They weren't blind to the situation. They weren't deaf to the outrage bubbling in the crowd. Yet they shifted forward, caught between orders and conscience. Amara clung to her suitcase. "Please, don't let her do this." "I didn't do anything wrong." The attendant folded her arms, satisfied. "Rules are rules. Fraud is fraud. She's not boarding this plane." The air grew thick with tension. Every eye in the terminal was locked on them. Everyone waiting for the next move, and what came next would decide everything. If you stood there, if you heard those words, saw those ashes, watched that girl's tears, what would you have done? Would you have stayed silent like so many did that day? Or would you have spoken, knowing silence makes you part of the injustice? Because at that moment, the line between cruelty and courage was razor thin, and only a few dared to cross it. Before anyone could act, Amara's mother swayed. Her cries broke into a gasp, her body folding as she hit the floor. "Mom!" Amara screamed, dropping beside her. Chaos erupted. Passengers shouted for help, others froze, and the guards rushed forward in panic. The attendant stepped back, eyes wide for the first time. Her control cracked, not from conscience, but from fear of what the world had just witnessed. And in that instant, the humiliation that had defined the day shifted into something else, something that would haunt every witness, and soon, an entire nation. "I have it all on camera." The voice cut through the chaos like a blade. Heads whipped around. A woman stepped forward from the crowd, her phone gripped firmly in her hand. Her tone carried no hesitation, no fear. The attendant's smirk faltered. "Excuse me?" The woman raised her chin. "Every word you said, every cruel gesture, every second of you humiliating this girl in front of all these people, it's all recorded." Gasps rippled through the passengers. Amara's heart thudded against her ribs, disbelief mixing with fragile hope. The attendant's voice sharpened, but it cracked at the edges. "You delete that right now. That's private property." "Property?" the woman snapped. "What you did wasn't just property. It was racism, discrimination, a hate crime on full display." She shifted her gaze to the onlookers. "And now, the whole world is going to see it." Passengers leaned in, murmurs spreading like wildfire. For the first time, Amara felt the balance shift, like a rope pulling against the hands that had tied it. But if one recording could change everything, what would happen when it was finally shown? Without waiting another second, the woman thrust her phone toward security. "Look for yourselves. Proof doesn't lie." The guards hesitated, their earlier certainty crumbling. On the glowing screen, the video played back in real time. The sneers, the mockery, the destruction of Amara's passport. "Sir," the woman pressed, her tone commanding, "this is evidence of racial discrimination. If you ignore it, you're complicit." Passengers craned their necks to see, their whispers carrying a mixture of shock and disgust. "She really burned it. That's unbelievable. How is she still standing here?" Amara's breathing hitched as she watched the uniformed men shift uncomfortably, the weight of truth pressing harder against their silence. The crowd leaned in closer, but the video wasn't the end, it was only the beginning. "They can't ignore this!" someone shouted from the back. The hushed whispers transformed into open defiance. "She deserves justice! Enough with this abuse! Why isn't anyone arresting her?" Phones shot up into the air, more screens recording, more voices echoing outrage. For once, Amara wasn't just a target. She was surrounded by people who finally saw the injustice for what it was. The attendant's face paled. She opened her mouth, but her words drowned under the noise of rising voices, and still the anger kept building. I was just following protocol." The attendant stammered, her polished confidence splintering into desperation. Her hands fidgeted, eyes darting from the journalist to the guards, then back to the growing crowd of furious passengers. The calm, smug authority she once held slipped through her trembling fingers. "Protocol doesn't involve setting passports on fire," someone jeered. Laughter, mocking this time, rose from the audience. For the first time, Amara saw fear where arrogance once lived. But fear had a way of making people dangerous. A man in a navy blazer pushed through the crowd, beads of sweat visible on his forehead. "What's going on here?" Security handed him the phone. His face drained as he watched the footage, the evidence too damning to deny. The chants, the anger, the recording, it all bore down on him at once. He looked at the attendant, then at Amara, his voice trembling. This is serious. But what he did next would decide everything. Before the manager could speak, phones buzzed across the terminal. The journalist smiled grimly. "It's already online." Within minutes, hashtags ignited across social media, the video spreading faster than the airline could react. The tide had shifted, but the battle wasn't over. Amara could feel it. The storm was just beginning, and the question that hung in the air was chilling. What price would the truth demand next? The manager's voice thundered above the noise. "Enough! You're fired! Right here, right now!" The words silenced the terminal. Gasps rippled like a shockwave as the flight attendant's jaw dropped. "You can't," she stuttered, eyes darting wildly. "Oh, I can," the manager cut her off, steel in his tone. "And I will. You've embarrassed this airline, humiliated an innocent passenger, and the evidence is undeniable." Two security guards stepped forward. The attendant clawed for excuses, but her voice cracked. "I was only—" "Save it," the journalist snapped from the crowd. "You weren't enforcing rules. You were enforcing prejudice." The guards flanked her, escorting her toward the exit. Passengers broke into scattered applause, some jeering. Amara's chest rose and fell, tears threatening but pride holding them back. For the first time all day, she wasn't shrinking. She was standing, but the crowd wasn't done. "Apologize to her!" someone shouted. "Yes!" voices chorused. "She deserves it!" The journalist stepped closer to the manager. "If this airline wants even a shred of credibility left, you will make this right, publicly." All eyes turned to Amara. Her trembling hands clutched her mother's arm. The manager lowered his head. On behalf of this airline, we deeply apologize for the disgraceful treatment you endured. Whispers swept the crowd, approval mixing with anger. Amara's dignity, shattered hours ago, was finally pieced back together in front of everyone, but justice was only beginning to unfold. By the time the line began moving again, phones buzzed everywhere. The journalist's footage was no longer just a recording, it was a wildfire. Uploaded, shared, reposted. Millions of eyes locked on the injustice that had unfolded at this gate. Before the plane even boarded, the story was already viral, and Amara's name was spreading with it. When she finally stepped onto the aircraft, passengers greeted her not with stares, but with quiet nods of respect. Some whispered encouragement. Some offered smiles. Hours later, when the wheels touched foreign soil, Amara was no longer just a passenger who had suffered racism. She was a living symbol of resilience. News crews waited. Headlines screamed her story across continents, and Amara, still shaken but resolute, realized she hadn't just survived humiliation, she had turned it into a movement. But the full weight of that victory was still to come. Days later, the fallout was unstoppable. The airline stocks plunged. Investigations opened. Boycotts trended worldwide. Meanwhile, Amara stood tall before a sea of microphones, her voice steady. She tried to ground me. Instead, she grounded her own airline. And with that single line, the story closed on one truth. Dignity can be broken for a moment, but justice, once unleashed, cannot be silenced. Would you have spoken up? That question isn't for the crowd in the story, it's for you. Imagine standing in that airport, watching a young girl humiliated, her future nearly stolen by prejudice. Would you have stayed silent, staring at the floor? Or would you have raised your voice when it mattered most? Silence protects the oppressor. Courage protects the oppressed. And the truth is, every bystander makes a choice, even when they say nothing. So ask yourself, if you were there, what would you have done? Now imagine Amara was your sister, your daughter, your best friend. Imagine the shame in her eyes was theirs. Would the anger in your chest burn hotter? Would you stand taller? Racism isn't just a story we watch. It's a wound we carry together. That's why your voice counts here too. Drop a comment. Tell us what you would have done. Share this story if you believe silence is no longer an option. And hit subscribe, not just for content, but to join a community that refuses to let injustice go unchecked. Because silence online is the same as silence in that airport. One girl's pain lit a fire. One crowd's silence was broken. And one truth was exposed to the world. One girl's pain exposed a truth the world couldn't ignore.